The snow should have been the loudest thing on that highway. Soft flakes whispering against tanker trucks, and the humming neon of a forgotten gas station. But on that Christmas Eve, the loudest sound was silence. 500 motorcycles sat in a tight circle around the pumps, chrome and steel breathing in low, steady rumbles, their riders standing shoulder to shoulder in the falling white. In the middle of it all, an old biker with a white beard had tears frozen into his whiskers, and a little girl in a hospital blanket was holding his hand like she was the one keeping him upright. The men in black leather vests and full-sleeve tattoos weren't there to cause trouble. They were there because a homeless 7-year-old had taken a beating to save one of their own. And what those 500 Hell's Angels were about to do for her would be talked about in that county for the rest of their lives. Just a few hours earlier, no one knew Daisy's name. To most people, she was just another small, shivering shape that winter swallowed without asking permission. She sat curled behind a humming vending machine, knees pulled up under a thin summer dress that still carried the ghost of warmer days. Her bare legs were turning red in the cold, her sneakers soaked through. She pressed her spine against the warm metal like it was a fireplace instead of a machine that sold stale chips. In her hands, she held a tattered teddy bear with one eye missing and a torn ear, the last surviving piece of the life she used to have. While the wind pushed hard against the glass doors and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, Daisy tried to be invisible, listening to the sound of engines and men's laughter on the other side of the wall. Inside the station, the smell of burned coffee and gasoline mixed in a way only lonely places manage. An old biker everyone called Bear stood at the counter, his breath still fogging from the cold. His black leather sleeveless vest hung open over a faded thermal shirt, the Hell's Angels patch, a stylized phoenix wrapped around an iron cross, spread proudly across his back. Full-sleeve tattoos wrapped both arms, a skull inked deep into the bicep that now ached in the cold. His slicked-back gray hair and full white beard made kids stare at him in grocery stores every December. Tonight, he just wanted to top off the tank and finish his last ride before Christmas morning. He cradled a paper cup of steaming coffee in one hand, keys in the other, thinking about the brothers he'd buried, the promises he still had to keep, and how the road always felt loneliest right before the holidays. At the far pump, a pickup truck idled, its muffler coughing sour exhaust into the cold air. 3 men leaned against it, the kind of local bullies everyone knows by voice before they know by name. Their faces were flushed from cheap liquor, their jackets stained from 100 nights just like this one. They laughed too loudly, talked too big, and moved like the entire world was a bar fight that hadn't started yet. One of them tapped a baseball bat against his boot, the hollow ring of wood on rubber carrying easily through the night. To them, this gas station didn't belong to the clerk, or the company, or the highway. It belonged to whoever was meanest in the moment. Tonight, they were determined it would be them. Bear pushed open the glass door with his shoulder, stepping into the wind with his coffee cradled in his big, tattooed hand. He moved slowly, careful on the ice, the way a man walks after too many falls and too many years. He didn't see Daisy pressed against the vending machine, didn't see the way her eyes tracked every movement, measuring danger like only a scared child can. He did notice the 3 men, though. You can't live long on the road without feeling trouble in your bones. Their laughter turned sharper when they saw him. The one with the bat straightened up, eyes narrowing, a mean grin sliding across his face as he watched the old biker walk by. Bear nodded once, trying to keep the peace. He'd learned a long time ago that most fights start with somebody looking for a mirror to punch. It happened in a heartbeat, and yet slow enough for Daisy to see every frame. As Bear stepped toward his bike, a gust of wind caught the coffee cup, tilting it just enough. A splash of hot liquid leapt up and landed on the boot of the man with the bat. Not much. Not enough to burn, but enough to stain. Enough to bruise his pride. The man jerked his foot back like he'd been shot, staring at the brown blotch spreading across the leather. His buddies exploded with laughter, and something ugly snapped in his eyes. He didn't see an accident. He saw an excuse. The bat swung up, not hard yet, just a warning. "You think that's funny, old man?" he slurred, already stepping forward. Bear lifted a hand, apology in his eyes, but apologies are useless to men who live off intimidation. Before he could get a full word out, two of the men shoved him. One shoulder, then the other, a hard, practiced push from both sides. His boots slid on the thin layer of ice, and the world tilted. He went backward into the snow with a grunt, the heavy Harley tipping with him. The bike crashed down, its weight trapping his leg awkwardly beneath it, pain shooting up his hip like fire. The air left his lungs in a rush. The snow felt suddenly colder, harder, as the bat-wielding man stepped closer, towering over him. Daisy watched his shadow grow longer across the white ground, the bat rising slowly until it hovered above the old biker's head. Even from behind the vending machine, she could hear the breathless chuckle ripple from the men, like this was a game. To them, his life was just another story they'd brag about later. Bear's heart pounded in his ears, loud as any engine. Pain locked his leg in place, and every attempt to move only made it worse. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, the weight of the Harley turning his lower body into dead stone. He looked up at the man with the bat, studying his face the way a soldier studies a storm. There was no hesitation there, no second thoughts, just the sick thrill of someone who'd finally found something weaker they could crush. He thought about the brothers who would be waiting for his call, about the kids who'd hidden behind their mothers in grocery stores when they spotted his beard and leather vest, about the way people thought he was scary, until they needed help. He tasted metal in his mouth, and knew that if the bat fell, this Christmas Eve might be his last. Behind the vending machine, Daisy's body shook, but not from the cold anymore. Fear crawled up her spine and wrapped around her throat, making it hard to swallow. She had learned, over too many bad nights, that when grown men yelled and weapons came out, the smartest thing a little girl could do was disappear. She should have stayed still. She should have shut her eyes. She told herself that, heard the tired voice of every adult who had ever told her to stay out of the way. But then she saw his beard, white and thick, sparkling with snowflakes. She saw the way he didn't beg, didn't plead, just stared up at the man with the bat like he was too tired to be afraid. Something in her small chest twisted. To Daisy, alone on Christmas Eve, that beard meant something different. It meant stories and cookies and a man who gave instead of taking. Her bare feet slipped on the snow as she moved. Daisy didn't plan it. There was no speech in her head, no heroic music, no thought of what would happen next. There was just one loud, clear idea banging around in her skull. They were going to hurt Santa, and she couldn't let that happen. She burst from behind the vending machine like a small, shivering comet, dress whipping around her knees, teddy bear clenched so tight in her hand the worn fabric strained at the seams. The men turned, startled by the streak of movement. The bat paused in the air for the first time. Before any of them could react, the tiny girl threw herself down over Bear's chest, spreading her body as wide as it would go, as if she could somehow make herself big enough to cover all of him. Her little back arched, her shoulders shaking. but she didn't move away. "Please!" Her voice cracked in the cold, shrill and desperate, cutting through the men's drunken laughter. She lifted her torn teddy bear toward the attacker with the bat, arms trembling under the weight of the world pressing down on them. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, making her eyes look even bigger, round with terror. "Please, take my bear. It's all I have. Just don't hurt Santa." The words hung there, absurd and holy all at once. The bat-wielding man blinked, thrown off balance by the title she'd given the biker pinned beneath her. Santa. He glanced at Bear's white beard, at the trembling child using her own thin body as a shield. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Bear, the men. Even the snow seemed to hold its breath. Daisy squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for impact that might never come. The moment shattered when the man with the bat snarled and swung anyway, angry now not just at the coffee, but at being made to feel anything resembling shame. He tried to yank the bat away at the last second, but he'd already committed to the movement. The wood clipped Daisy's shoulder and back as he redirected it. Not full force, but hard enough to send a spike of pain blazing across her small frame. She cried out, the sound muffled against Bear's chest. Bear roared from beneath her, more in fury than in pain. The other two men cursed, suddenly aware that lines they didn't even believe in had been crossed. It was one thing to scare an old biker. It was another to hit a child who'd thrown herself into the line of fire. In the gas station window, the clerk's eyes went wide. His shaking hands finally found the phone. Somewhere between sirens starting up in the distance and the rattle of the clerk's terrified 911 call, a trucker at the far pump raised his own phone. He filmed the tiny girl refusing to move, the old biker trying to push her away to safety with one free arm, the smear of coffee on a bully's boot that had started all of this. That video would travel farther than any of them knew. But right now, the world was no bigger than Daisy's shaking shoulders and Bear's desperate grip on the bat as he finally caught it mid-swing with his free hand. Tires squealed as the pickup lurched backward, cowards retreating now that they'd had their fun, and heard the first faint wail of approaching sirens. They left the old man pinned, the little girl sobbing, and a trail of fear and outrage frozen into the snow behind them. If you're still here, listening to this little girl's courage on a cold Christmas Eve, take a second to breathe it in. Moments like this are why stories like these matter. If you believe that no child should ever have to stand between a weapon and a stranger just to keep kindness alive in the world, we'd be honored to have you ride with us. Subscribe to Gentle Bikers, tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next story, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Somewhere out there, there's another Daisy, and you might be closer to her than you think. The first police car arrived, with its lights painting the snow in frantic reds and blues, but by the time the officers stepped out, the pickup truck was already a memory fading into the storm. The clerk pointed with a shaking hand, voice tumbling over itself as he tried to explain what had happened. The officers saw enough without words. An old biker, leg pinned under a fallen Harley, and a child in a summer dress wrapped around his chest like she was afraid someone might try to take him away. Daisy flinched at the sight of uniforms, an old reflex her small body hadn't unlearned. Bear felt it in the way she tensed against him. He lifted a heavy, tattooed hand and laid it gently on her back, ignoring the pain shooting up his leg. "Easy, little one," he rumbled, voice soft enough that only she could hear. "They're here to help this time." It took 3 adults to lift the Harley enough to slide Bear's leg free. He bit down on a groan, not wanting to scare Daisy any more than she already was. The paramedics arrived next, moving with the calm precision of people who have seen too many Christmas Eves ruined by bad decisions. They checked Daisy's shoulder, the red mark already blooming under her dress, and the way she winced when they touched her back. "You're a brave one of them murmured, wrapping a blanket around her narrow shoulders. She looked smaller than ever inside it, a little bird swallowed by hospital white. When the medic asked where her parents were, she dropped her gaze to the snow. The silence that followed said more than any words could. Bear watched that silence, felt it, and something inside his chest shifted painfully into place. He'd known loss, but this was different. This was absence. Bear ended up in the back of the ambulance with Daisy, not because protocol demanded it, but because Daisy refused to let go of his hand. She sat on the bench seat, legs dangling, blanket pulled up to her chin, teddy bear tucked under her arm. Every time the siren wailed, she flinched, eyes darting to the back doors like she expected the truck and the men and the bat to burst through again. Bear studied her in the dim, bouncing light. 7 years old, maybe. Too thin. Eyes too old. He felt the roughness of his own palm wrapped around her small fingers, greasy from engine work and years of road dust that never really washed away. He wondered who had held her hand before tonight. He wondered why they weren't here now. The big, white-bearded biker everyone joked looked like Santa found himself worrying about stockings and fireplaces he'd never seen. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced the snow, and the smell of antiseptic replaced gasoline. Doctors poked, scanned, and taped. Bear's leg wasn't broken, but it would be a mess of bruises for weeks. Daisy's shoulder was sprained, her back bruised, but the X-rays showed nothing broken there either. The nurses marveled at how she shrugged off questions with shy, clipped answers. "Where do you live?" "Around." "Who takes care of you?" "Sometimes people." "How long have you been on your own?" She stared at the floor and didn't answer at all. Social services was called, because that's what the chart said should happen. But Christmas Eve piles up emergencies like dirty dishes in a sink, and somewhere between paperwork and protocol, Daisy was told she might have to sleep in a waiting chair until someone could come in the morning to figure things out. Bear sat across from her, leg propped up, discharge papers crumpled in his big hand. He watched the parade of rushing footsteps and clipped voices, watched Daisy shrink backward every time someone in a uniform walked by. It didn't sit right with him. None of it did. The idea that a kid who had thrown herself in front of a bat for a stranger could be left to doze upright in a noisy hallway made bile rise in his throat. He'd seen brothers take bullets for less loyalty than she'd shown tonight. He shifted in his seat, the leather of his vest creaking softly, and reached for his phone. The Hells Angels patch on his back wasn't decoration. It was a promise stitched in heavy thread. And tonight, that promise was owed to a 7-year-old girl named Daisy, who thought he was Santa. "Daisy," he said quietly, leaning forward. She looked up, eyes still ringed with the redness of earlier tears. "I'm Bear." He tipped his head toward his beard with a small, wry smile. "I'm not really Santa, but I ride with some folks who act a lot like elves when something needs fixin'." The corner of her mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile trying to be born. "Those men back there," he went on, keeping his tone steady. "They ever hurt you before? You seen 'em around?" She nodded, tiny and solemn. "They come by sometimes. They take things." Her fingers tightened on the teddy bear, as if she expected someone to snatch that too. Bear felt it like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a one-time accident. This was a pattern, a disease in human form. And Daisy had stepped between that disease and a stranger because somewhere in her small, battered heart, she still believed in something better. "Listen to me, little one," Bear said, his voice dropping into the tone he used with scared rookies and grieving widows. "What you did out there. I've seen men with decades of service and steel in their veins who wouldn't have done half as much. You hear me? You were braver than all three of those cowards put together." Daisy blinked, unsure what to do with praise that generous. "But here's the thing," he continued. "Brave or not, you don't gotta do this part alone." He lifted his phone and turned it so she could see the background image. A row of leather-clad men and women, all in black sleeveless vests with the same Hell's Angels Phoenix and Iron Cross patch, tattoos on their arms, skulls inked on biceps, faces hard, but eyes clear. "These are my brothers and sisters. When one of us gets hurt, we all feel it. And when somebody saves one of us..." He let the sentence hang, letting her fill in the rest. Daisy stared at the photo, then at Bear's patched vest, then back at the phone. "They look scary," she whispered, the honesty of a child slipping out. Bear chuckled, the sound low and warm. "That's kind of the point," he admitted. "Scares off the wolves. But you know what we're really good at?" He leaned closer. "We show up for people who don't have anyone else. We stand between bullies and the ones they think are easy to break." He tapped a finger gently against her teddy bear. "And we keep promises. That's our favorite part." She chewed her lip, processing this. "Are they coming here?" she asked. Bear's eyes softened. "They will if I call," he said. "But I won't bring them into something you don't want. So I'm going to ask you, Daisy. Do you want us to help? Not just with my leg or their mess out there. With you." The question seemed too big for someone so small. Daisy looked around the hallway, like the walls might offer an answer. Help meant attention, and attention had so rarely worked in her favor. But she thought about the pickup truck, about the men's faces when they laughed at Bear's pain. She thought about the bat kissing her back and the way nobody came running until the clerk panicked. She thought about sleeping behind vending machines and beneath bus stop benches, counting cars instead of sheep. Slowly, she nodded. "I don't want to be cold anymore," she said. It came out flat, not dramatic, just a simple, exhausted truth. Bear felt his throat tighten. That was it. Not toys, not candy, not even stockings. Just warmth. Safety. A place that wasn't the backside of a machine humming in the dark. "All right then," he said. "You just gave me all I need." Bear tapped a series of numbers his fingers knew better than his own birthday. The call connected on the first ring. "Yeah?" came a gravelly voice, the background noise of clinking plates and distant jukebox telling Bear he'd interrupted someone's late-night plans. "It's Bear," he said. That alone changed the tone. The room on the other end went quieter. "I'm at County General. Had a run-in at the old highway station." He paused, letting his brothers hear the strain in his voice, but not the weakness. "I'm fine. Legs banged up. Bike's pissed at me. But that ain't why I'm calling." He glanced at Daisy, who was watching him like each word might decide her future. "We got a situation with a kid. 7 years old. No coat. No home. Stepped between a bat and my head because she thought I was Santa Claus." Silence answered him, laden and heavy. On the other end of the line, someone muttered a curse under their breath, the sound more prayer than profanity. Another voice cut in, the club president's, low, steady, the kind of voice that could calm storms or call them up. "Run that by me again," he said slowly. Bear did, painting the gas station in clipped strokes. The spilled coffee, the boot, the bat, the shove, the little girl flying out of nowhere, the word Santa hurled like a shield. When he finished, there was no noise at all. just breathing. Bear knew what they were seeing in their heads because he'd seen it too. Not the bat, not the men, the child, the choice. "Where is she now?" the president asked. "Right in front of me," Bear said. "Hospital's saying they'll try to find her a bed, eventually. She deserves better than eventually." "You said she saved one of ours?" the president asked, more to the room around him than to Bear. Chairs scraped. Bottles hit tables. Somewhere, an engine revved, answer without words. "Listen up," the president called, voice carrying over the jukebox. "Old Man Bear just got his life saved by a little girl with nothing but a teddy bear and a backbone of steel. She took a hit meant for him. Christmas Eve. No coat, no home." He paused. "We gonna let that go unanswered?" The answer rose like thunder. Back at the hospital, Bear could almost hear the engines in his imagination before they even fired up in the real world. The president came back on the line. "We're rolling," he said simply. "Local chapter first. Then whoever else can make it. You keep that kid where she can see you. We're not leaving her story the way those men wrote it." Bear nodded, even though the man couldn't see him. "Appreciate you, brother," he said. "No," the president replied. "We appreciate her. She reminded us what this patch is for." When the call ended, Bear slid the phone back into his pocket and leaned forward. "Daisy," he said. "You ever seen a lot of motorcycles in one place?" She blinked. "On TV," she admitted. "You're about to see it in real life," he told her. "Every single one of them is coming because of you." The stakes, once measured in seconds and the swing of a bat, grew into something larger that night. It wasn't just about one close call in the snow anymore. It was about a line in the sand between a little girl's future and the men who thought they could smash it for fun. It was about a homeless child who had given everything she had, a teddy bear and her own small body, to protect a stranger she'd mistaken for Santa. Now, the Hells Angels were answering in the only way they knew how. With presence, with numbers, with a promise. Outside, the snow kept falling. But somewhere out there, engines were already rumbling awake, one by one, across counties and state lines. And by the time dawn was ready to light that lonely gas station again, 500 Hells Angels would be riding through the storm. Not for revenge alone, but for a little girl named Daisy, who had reminded them what it really meant to wear leather. Dawn didn't so much rise as creep in on that Christmas morning. The sky over the county was a pale, tired gray, and the snow that had fallen all night now lay in thick, muffled blankets over everything. Fields, rooftops, that lonely highway gas station. Inside the hospital, the world still smelled like antiseptic and coffee that had sat too long on the burner. Bear signed the last of the discharge papers with a grumble, his bruised leg wrapped tight. Daisy sat beside him, in an oversized borrowed coat, her thin summer dress hidden underneath, her tattered teddy bear tucked securely under one arm. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bat hanging in the air. But there was something new in her chest now, too. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. "You sure about this, old man?" the nurse had asked, when Bear insisted on being discharged. He'd just given her that steady look, the one that said he'd been through worse and had places to be. "Promise I won't run any marathons," he'd replied. "Just got a Christmas appointment I don't intend to miss." He didn't tell her that appointment was with 500 roaring engines and a little girl who needed to see, with her own eyes, what kind of world she'd stepped into when she chose to stand between a bat and a biker. As they stepped through the automatic doors into the cold, Daisy's breath puffed in small clouds. She slipped her hand into Bear's, without asking this time. The contact felt right, like a question she'd finally decided to answer. A pickup sat waiting at the curb, Not the bullies' truck, but a clean, well-used one with a big front grille and a familiar decal on the windshield. Behind the wheel sat a woman in her 40s, hair pulled back beneath a knit cap, black leather sleeveless vest over a thick flannel, full-sleeve tattoos curling down her arms. A skull tattoo sat proud on her bicep. The Hells Angels patch glowed on her back when she leaned across to push open the passenger door. Her expression was calm, eyes sharp but kind. "Morning, Bear," she called. "You look like roadkill somebody forgot to bury." Bear snorted. "Love you too, Raven." He opened the back door and helped Daisy climb in. "This here is Daisy," he said. "Daisy, this is Raven. She's family." Daisy studied the woman's tattoos, the leather, the stoic face, then the small, warm smile that softened all of it. "Hi," she whispered. The ride back to the gas station was quiet at first, the only sound the tires crunching over frozen slush and the heater blowing lukewarm air. Daisy watched the world slide past, all white fields and dark trees like ink strokes on paper. Every now and then, Raven caught her gaze in the rearview mirror and offered a little wink or a raised eyebrow, like they shared a secret. Bear sat in the front, one hand absently rubbing his leg, the other resting palm up on his knee. Daisy's small hand had found its way there at some point, as if drawn by gravity. "Still think I'm Santa?" he asked after a while, voice light. She studied his beard and profile, the way the white whiskers curled, the way his eyes crinkled when he tried to hide a smile. "Maybe," she said. "But even if you're not, I think you know him." They saw the gas station long before they reached it, not because of the neon lights or the familiar shape of the canopy, but because of the line of motorcycles already starting to gather like birds on a wire. At first there were only a few, maybe 20, parked neatly by the pumps. Then, as the truck drew closer, Daisy realized the line stretched farther, disappearing beyond the building. The closer they got, the louder the world became. Low, rolling engine rumbles layered over each other until the sound wasn't just noise anymore. It was a living thing, breathing, pulsing in the cold air. Daisy pressed her face to the window, eyes widening. The butterflies in her stomach weren't all fear this time. Some of them felt like awe. Raven pulled into the lot, moving slowly, with the unspoken respect of one rider entering a gathering of many. As the truck turned, Daisy saw them. Dozens of bikers lined up, then scores, then more. Black leather sleeveless vests everywhere, each one bearing the Hells Angels patch on the back. Full-sleeve tattoos, skulls inked on biceps, slicked back hair, full beards or heavy stubble. They stood in small clusters at first, talk low, expressions calm, every movement controlled. The gas station that had been a stage for cruelty last night had become something else entirely this morning. A fortress made of people. Bear climbed out of the truck slowly, his leg protesting, and the nearest bikers turned toward him with nods and claps on the shoulder. Then they saw Daisy. For a heartbeat, the noise dropped. Not completely, engines still idled, but the human part of the sound softened, conversations pausing. 100 pairs of eyes, hard from years on the road, took in the small figure stepping out behind Bear. Daisy stood there, coat too big, teddy bear tucked under her arm, snowflakes catching in her hair. She fought the urge to shrink back behind him. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, the bikers straightened their vests and gave her the smallest of nods. The kind of nod you give someone you respect, not someone you pity. No one rushed at her. No one tried to scoop her up in a hug. They just made a little space around her and Bear, like the world had rearranged itself to give this tiny human a circle of her own. The club president stepped forward from the mass of leather and chrome. He was a broad man in his 50s, slicked back dark hair shot with silver, full beard trimmed close. His black leather sleeveless vest bore the same Hell's Angels patch, and his arms were a mural of ink, full sleeves wrapping from shoulder to wrist, a skull tattoo anchored like a badge on his bicep. His expression was not soft, but it wasn't cruel either. It was serious, focused, the way someone looks when they're handling something breakable and precious. He stopped a few feet in front of Daisy, and without any show, dropped to one knee so his eyes were on her level. The entire parking lot seemed to inhale. "You must be Daisy," he said, voice low and steady. Daisy swallowed, fingers digging into her teddy bear. "Yes, sir," she whispered. The president glanced at Bear, then back at her. "My name's Hawk," he said. "Your friend Bear here gave me a call last night. Told me a story I had trouble believing." He tilted his head. "Said a 7-year-old girl with nothing but a teddy bear and a spine of steel threw herself in front of a bat to protect an old biker she'd never met." A faint murmur moved through the crowd behind him, like wind through trees. Daisy's cheeks flushed. "I thought he was Santa," she blurted, words tumbling out. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the bikers, not mocking, but warm. Hawk's beard twitched. "Well," he said, "you weren't far off. He's been delivering things to people who need him longer than some of these boys have been alive." Hawk's gaze turned serious again. "Daisy," he said, "just so we're clear, you didn't owe him that. You didn't owe anybody that. What you did out here last night, that was a choice, a brave one. And around here we don't let choices like that slip by unnoticed." He snapped his fingers once. From behind the line, Raven stepped forward carrying something folded carefully over her arms. Black leather, small, the shine of new stitching catching the light. Daisy's breath caught. It was a vest, just her size. The same cut as theirs, but lined with soft, warm material on the inside. On the back was not their full patch, but a smaller emblem. The same phoenix and iron cross design, wrapped with a banner that read, "Angel's Family." "We've got rules about who wears what," Hawk explained gently. "Grown folks like us, we earn our patches on the road. You?" He nodded toward the gas pumps, toward the vending machine, toward the place where the snow still held the faint scars of last night's struggle. "You earned this before you even knew our name." He looked to Raven, who unfolded the vest and helped slip it around Daisy's small shoulders, adjusting it over the borrowed coat. The leather was heavy, but comforting, like armor made out of hugs she'd never gotten. Daisy ran a small hand over the special patch, tracing the phoenix with her fingers. For the first time, she didn't feel like a piece of trash left behind a machine. She felt claimed, seen. "Here's what this means, little one," Hawk continued. "It means you're not alone anymore. It means when the cold comes, we will find a way to keep you warm. It means when bullies think they can swing bats at people like you, they'll have more than one old man to answer to." His voice didn't get louder. It didn't need to. The agreement rolled through the gathered bikers anyway. Nods, clenched jaws, the subtle shifting of weight that meant if he gave the word, every one of them would move as one. Daisy looked from Hawk to Bear to Raven to the faces ringing her in a circle of leather and ink. "What about those men?" she asked quietly. The question nobody else had wanted to ask out loud. "The ones with the truck?" Hawk's eyes cooled, like a wind had swept across a fire and turned it into something harder, sharper. "That's the other reason we're here," he said. He stood up slowly, joints creaking, and turned to face the sea of vests. "All right," he called. "You heard the girl. 3 men in a pickup thought they could use a bat on an old biker and a little kid on Christmas Eve. They thought nobody would stand in their way. We're here to introduce them to the concept of being wrong. A low, humorless chuckle rippled through the crowd. But we do this our way. No chaos, no stupidity. We are not them. He jerked his chin toward the highway. Sheriff's been watching that video on repeat since it hit his phone. He's already on his way to where those boys like to drink off their bad decisions. We're just going to be there to observe the conversation. Bear felt his chest loosen at that. He respected the need for heat, for the urge to burn through wrong with raw power, but he respected control more. Watching Hawk tie their fury to the slow anchor of the law reminded him why he'd put that patch on his back in the first place. He leaned down to Daisy. "You riding with us?" he asked softly. Her eyes went wide. "On the motorcycle?" she said, half fear, half wonder. He shook his head. "Not today, leg and all." He nodded toward Raven's truck. "You ride with Raven, window view, safe distance. But you're gonna see something important." Daisy clutched her teddy bear tighter, then nodded. Somewhere under the fear, there was a spark of curiosity. What did justice look like when it showed up on 2 wheels? The next few minutes were a ballet of controlled movement. Bikers swung into saddles with practiced ease, engines ticking from idle to a deeper, focused roar. Chrome gleamed despite the gray sky, exhaust puffed in steady clouds. No one sped off, no one revved just to be loud. They lined up in an organized procession, 2 by 2, then 4 by 4, forming a long, snaking column that wrapped around the gas station lot. Raven eased the truck into position near the middle of the convoy, a protective cocoon of bikes in front and behind. Daisy knelt on the seat, peering out the window, her small palm pressed to the glass. The sound of hundreds of engines rose together, not chaotic but unified, like a choir that sang in gasoline and steel. When Hawk raised his gloved hand, the noise hit a brief plateau. Every throttle held steady, every eye watching. He glanced back once, his gaze finding Daisy through the truck window. He gave the smallest nod. This rollout was for her. Then he dropped his hand, and the column began to move. The convoy poured out onto the highway, tires crunching the snow into dark tracks that stretched behind them like a declaration. Cars pulled over as they passed, some drivers staring with their mouths open, others lifting phones to film, a few simply placing hands over their hearts as the black leather river flowed by. Somewhere in that reverent silence, Daisy understood. This wasn't just about punishing bad men. This was about the town seeing who really had her back. The bar where the 3 men liked to linger was the kind of place that never fully slept. Even on Christmas morning, a few regulars hunched over cheap beer and bad decisions. The 3 bullies sat near the back, nursing sore heads and swollen egos. One of them scrolled through his phone, stiff fingers jittering. "Look at this," he slurred, turning the screen toward the others. The video the trucker had taken was already circulating, gaining views by the minute. Comments poured in from strangers calling them monsters, cowards, worse. Each insult landed like a tiny stone tapping against a glass they hadn't realized was fragile. "It was just a joke," one muttered defensively. The others nodded too quickly. They were still telling themselves that when the first distant rumble shook the windows. At first, the bartender thought it was a plow truck. Then the glasses on the shelves began to hum. The rumble grew, layer by layer, until it was less a sound and more a pressure you felt in your teeth. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone reached for the TV remote, thinking maybe a storm warning was about to flash across the screen. Instead, Light flared from the front windows. Dozens, then hundreds of white beams cutting through the gray. A patron near the door pushed aside the curtain and froze. You boys might want to see this," he said, voice hollow. The three bullies shuffled forward, the smugness draining from their faces as they took in the sight. The parking lot was filled, edge to edge, with motorcycles. Hell's Angels stood in a wide horseshoe around the bar's entrance, black leather sleeveless vests a wall of inked muscle and quiet intent. No one shouted, no one beat on doors or rattled chains. They simply waited. Engines idled at the edges, the sound a constant low growl. At the open end of the horseshoe, Hawk stood with Bear at his side, Raven just behind them. Bear leaned on a cane he'd acquired somewhere between the hospital and here, but he stood straight, the white beard Daisy had mistaken for Santa's catching the thin light. From the cab of Raven's truck, parked near the road, Daisy watched with wide eyes. Raven had rolled the window down just enough for her to hear, just enough for the cold air and the reality of what was happening to sink in. The bar's door creaked open. The first of the three men stepped out, squinting against the brightness of all those headlights. His bravado evaporated as his brain caught up with what his eyes were seeing. He recognized the old biker immediately, the white beard now framed not by snow, but by a forest of leather and steel. His gaze flitted nervously from the skull tattoos on arms folded over vests to the calm, unreadable expressions staring back at him. The other two shuffled out behind him, shoulders drawn up, bodies trying to make themselves smaller. One of them still had last night's coffee stain on his boot, a brown smear that suddenly seemed brighter, louder than the engine noise. Hawk took a few steps forward, boots crunching on the packed snow. When he spoke, his voice carried without effort. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. "Sleep well?" The sarcasm was mild, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. The men shifted, eyes darting toward the road, where a sheriff's cruiser had just pulled up, lights flashing in a much calmer, more deliberate pattern than the night before. The sheriff stepped out, hand resting casually near his holster. Not gripping it, just aware of it. He gave Hawk a nod, the kind exchanged between two forces that knew, today at least, which side of the line they were standing on together. "We got a problem," Hawk continued, pacing slowly in front of the three men. "See, last night you boys decided to have yourselves a little fun. Old man in the snow, big bike on his leg, bat in your hand." He held out his palm. Bear placed a phone in it without looking. Hawk tapped the screen, and the gas station scene lit up for everyone to see. The trucker's shaky footage, the shove, the fall, the bat rising. Then Daisy, a streak of bravery in a summer dress, her tiny body covering Bear, her voice cracking on the words, "Just don't hurt Santa." The recording played on a portable speaker, her plea floating over the assembled crowd like a prayer someone had forgotten to answer. The three men stared at it, color draining from their faces. "Now, we're not here to talk about spilled coffee," Hawk said when the video ended. "We're here to talk about lines. There are a lot of lines in this world. Some are painted on roads. Some are written in law books." He jerked his chin toward the sheriff, who stood with arms folded, listening. "And some are the ones decent human beings don't cross, whether anyone's watching or not." He took another step closer, close enough now that the nearest of the bullies could see the details in the skull tattoo on his bicep, the way the ink had faded just slightly with time. "You crossed every one of those lines when you lifted that bat over a child." His voice didn't rise, but the silence around them seemed to deepen in response, One of the men tried on his old swagger like a jacket that no longer fit. "We didn't mean," he began, but his voice cracked on the second word. Hawk cut him off with a small shake of his head. "You meant enough to swing," he said. "You meant enough not to stop when she screamed. You meant enough to drive away and leave a little girl sobbing in the snow because you couldn't handle a coffee stain on your boot." He angled his head toward the stain again. "That right there? That's the cheapest thing that's ever cost you this much." The sheriff stepped forward now, voice like gravel smoothed by years of patience. "Boys," he said, "I've got charges so straightforward a rookie couldn't mess 'em up. Assault, child endangerment, leaving the scene of an injury. Might be more by the time the DA's done. That video?" He nodded toward Hawk's phone. "That's the kind of evidence lawyers drool over." One of the men swallowed hard, the movement visible even at a distance. His eyes darted toward the bikers, then back to the sheriff. "But before we get to the paperwork," Hawk added, "there's one more piece of business." He turned his head slightly, looking toward Raven's truck. "Daisy," he called, voice instantly softer. "Sweetheart, you mind stepping out for a minute?" Raven's door opened first. She hopped down, then helped Daisy out of the passenger side. The little girl's new leather vest peeked from under her coat, the Angels family patch bright against the dark. The entire line of bikers subtly shifted, making room without breaking formation, creating a clear path between Daisy and the men who'd swung the bat. Bear stepped up beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Not pushing, not pulling, just there if she needed it. Daisy's legs felt shaky, but she walked anyway, each step leaving small prints in the snow. When she reached Hawk's side, he crouched slightly so he wouldn't tower over her. "Daisy," Hawk said gently, "these are the men from last night." The three bullies couldn't quite meet her eyes. Their faces were pale, all the bravado drained out, leaving something raw and uncomfortable behind. "They're about to go with the sheriff," Hawk continued, "to answer for what they did. Before they do—" He looked back at them, gaze hardening. "You got something you need to say to this child?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the man with the bat finally lifted his head. His voice, when it came, was rough and small. I'm sorry," he muttered. Hawk's eyebrow rose. "Didn't quite catch that," he said. "Sounded like your courage got stuck in your throat." The sheriff didn't smile, but there was a glint of something like approval in his eyes. "Knees," he said quietly. The word dropped into the cold like a stone into water. Not a demand for humiliation, but a reminder of perspective. The three men sank slowly, jeans darkening where they met the snow. On their knees, they were suddenly at Daisy's eye level. It was harder to pretend she was just a problem, or a blur, or a thing they could shove aside. She was right there, tiny and real, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, the Angels family patch gleaming on her back when the coat shifted. The man with the bat cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said again, louder this time. "I was drunk. I was stupid. I shouldn't have hurt you. Or him." He flicked a glance at Bear. Daisy studied his face with a seriousness that didn't fit her age. She knew an empty apology when she heard one. She'd been on the receiving end of enough of them. But she also knew something else now, that whatever these men said or didn't say, they didn't get to write her story anymore. She hugged her bear closer. "You scared me," she said simply. "But you don't get to do that again." Her voice was small, but it carried a quiet verdict falling from someone the law might have labeled victim, but whom the bikers now recognized as something else entirely. Hawk nodded slowly, as if she'd just spoken for all of them. He straightened, his shadow falling long across the snow. He addressed the men one last time. "Here's how this goes," he said. "You're leaving here in the back of that cruiser. You're going to face charges. You're going to face every person in this town who sees that video and realizes what kind of men you really are." He took a step back, making a subtle gesture with his hand. The bikers shifted, opening a corridor leading directly to the sheriff's car. "You're also done here," Hawk added, voice flat. "This bar, this town, this highway, you show up around our kid again, or anyone like her, and you won't just be answering to the law. You'll be answering to all of us." There was no threat in his tone, not the kind you could put in a police report. But there was a promise, a very clear one. The sheriff cuffed the men without ceremony, guiding them through that living hallway of leather and ink. None of the bikers reached out to shove or spit or jeer. They just watched, arms folded, cold but calm, their stoic faces saying what their mouths didn't. "We saw what you did. We won't forget." The cruiser doors shut with a solid thump, and the car pulled away, taillights fading into the gray. For the first time since the night before, Daisy felt the knot in her stomach loosen just a little. The men who had swung the bat were gone, and this time they weren't driving themselves away. The parking lot seemed to exhale all at once. Engines began to wind down, some of them. Others kept idling, sending up steady plumes of breath into the cold air. Hawk turned back to Daisy and Bear. "That's one part handled," he said. "The rest, that's longer work." Bear nodded, understanding. Bruises fade. Legal cases move at the speed of paper. But the business of rebuilding a child's sense of safety? That's measured in nights slept without nightmares, and mornings where breakfast appears like clockwork. "We got room at the house," Raven said from behind them, voice casual, like she was offering a spare seat at a table instead of rewriting a child's life. "Guest room's been empty since my niece moved out. Plenty of coats, plenty of blankets." Daisy looked between them all, Hawk, Bear, Raven, the rows of bikers who had wrapped themselves around this little corner of the world like a leather and chrome shield. The wind tugged at her hair. Somewhere far off, church bells began to ring, late but earnest, calling people to services where candles would be lit and stories told about miracles in stables. She didn't know much about those stories, but she knew this. Last night, she'd been a cold, invisible girl behind a vending machine. Today, 500 bikers had ridden through the snow because she existed, because she mattered. Bear stepped in, leaning lightly on his cane. "You okay with that, little one?" he asked. "You won't hurt her feelings if you say no. You're the boss of your own story now." Daisy looked at Raven, at the quiet strength in her eyes. The way the other bikers watched carefully, but didn't crowd her. She thought of hospital chairs and waiting rooms, of social workers saying tomorrow, like it was a place you could get lost in. Then she thought of riding in Raven's truck earlier, the warmth of the heater, the way her joking tone had made the air feel less heavy. Daisy hugged her teddy bear tighter and nodded. "I want to go where you are," she said. The caravan back from the bar was smaller, but no less deliberate. Hawk and a few senior members broke off to talk to the sheriff, trading information, offering to show up as witnesses. "We'll be there," Hawk promised. "On time, clean vests, no drama, unless the judge starts swinging a bat." The sheriff huffed out a tired, appreciative sound that might have been a laugh. "I'll hold him to the gavel," he replied. It was an odd alliance, lawmen and bikers, but in that moment, they were on the same side of a very clear line. One protected the town on paper. The other reminded the town, by sheer presence, that some things weren't going to be tolerated anymore. Raven's house sat on the edge of town, a low, sturdy place with a sagging porch and a yard half claimed by motorcycles. Christmas lights hung crooked along the eaves, blinking in a pattern that had given up on being synchronized, but hadn't given up on shining. When they pulled up, Daisy pressed her face to the window again. There were boots on the porch, more vests hanging on hooks, the faint, muffled music of a radio playing old rock songs inside. This wasn't some polished, magazine-perfect home. It was lived in, a little rough around the edges, like the people who called it theirs. And for the first time, Daisy realized she liked that. Perfect things had never stayed in her life. Maybe something with a few dents would. Inside, warmth hit her like a hug. The smell of coffee, frying bacon, and pine needles wrapped around her senses, replacing the hospital's sterile chill. A scraggly Christmas tree leaned slightly in a corner, covered in a mix of old ornaments and a few hand-drawn ones from visiting kids. A dog with more enthusiasm than coordination skidded across the floor to sniff Daisy's shoes, tail wagging furiously. "That's Tank," Raven said. "Don't let the name fool you. He's more rug than guard dog." Daisy giggled despite herself as the dog leaned heavily against her legs, demanding head scratches. Tank made up his mind in an instant. This small human was his now. "Come on," Raven said, nodding toward a short hallway. "Got something to show you." Daisy followed, the dog trotting behind. Raven pushed open a door with a hand-painted sign that read, "Guest." The room inside was simple, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, a lamp shaped like a motorcycle, a window that looked out over the yard where bikes slept under their dustings of snow. There were a couple of stuffed animals on the pillow that had seen better days, but still had some hugs left in them. On the wall, a framed photo. Raven younger, standing next to a girl a little older than Daisy, both of them grinning with gap-toothed smiles. "My niece used to stay with me," Raven said quietly, following Daisy's gaze. "She grew up, moved out, got herself a life she doesn't need my spare room for anymore." She shrugged. "I didn't have the heart to pack it all away. Felt like this room was waiting on somebody." She looked down at Daisy. "Think maybe it was waiting on you?" Daisy stood in the doorway, too overwhelmed to step in at first. Her whole life had been built on the understanding that anything she touched might be taken away. The idea that this space, this bed, this lamp, could be hers, even temporarily, felt unreal. "Can I sleep here?" she asked, as if the invitation might have been a trick. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Raven said. "We'll talk with the folks we gotta talk to. Judges, social workers, all that. Nobody's just gonna scoop you up and disappear with you. But tonight?" She pointed at the bed. "Tonight, that's yours." Daisy walked in slowly, like the floor might vanish. She set her teddy bear on the pillow, then, after a moment, picked it up and placed it in the middle of the bed instead, like he was testing it out. She tugged off her shoes, toes curling in the soft rug. When she looked back at Raven, her eyes were shiny. "It's warm," she said, as if that were the most important metric. For her, it was. Later, as the day stretched into afternoon, the house filled with a rotating cast of bikers. They came in shifts, dropping off things like they were making deliveries on Santa's forgotten route. One brought bags of groceries, eggs, milk, pancake mix, fruit. Another carried in boxes of kids' clothes from his own daughter's too small pile. Someone else showed up with a thick winter coat, just Daisy's size, soft and lined, still smelling faintly of cedar from storage. Bear arrived with a carefully wrapped box under his arm. When Daisy opened it, she found a brand new teddy bear inside, soft and plush, with two bright button eyes. She picked the new bear up, testing its weight in her arms, then looked over at her old one. Threadbare, torn, one eye missing. For a moment, her face crumpled. Raven knelt beside her. "You don't have to choose," she said gently. "You can keep both. Old life, new life. One doesn't erase the other." Daisy nodded slowly, relief washing across her features. She tucked the new bear under one arm and the old one under the other, as if refusing to leave any piece of herself behind. Bear watched from the doorway, leaning on his cane, and that tightness in his chest easing a little more. This, he thought, is what it's supposed to look like when bikers show up. Not just roaring engines and stared-down bullies, but full cupboards and full arms. Weeks passed. Snow melted into slush, and then into puddles. Court dates were scheduled, then rescheduled, but they came eventually, as courts always do. The men from the bar stood in front of a judge, faces drawn, charges read aloud. The video played again, this time on a courtroom screen. Daisy didn't have to sit in the same room as them. The system gave her that much. But she sat in a smaller side room with Raven on one side and Bear on the other, watching on a monitor, small hand folded into a much larger tattooed one. The judge's words were careful, measured, but the message was clear. What had been done to her, and to Bear, mattered. It would cost those men time, money, freedom. Not all of Daisy's battles were fought in court. Some of them were fought at night, in the dark, when memories crept in. She woke sometimes with a shout caught in her throat, fingers aching from gripping a teddy bear too tight. Each time, Tank the dog would appear, heavy paws thumping onto the bed, pushing in close until her breathing slowed. On some nights, she padded quietly down the hall to find Bear dozing in a recliner, leg propped up, motorcycle magazine slipping from his hand. She'd curl up at his side, and he'd wake just enough to drape a blanket over her and murmur, "You're safe, little one. Go back to dreaming." Slowly, the images in her head shifted, from bats and boots to bikes on open roads, and kitchens full of people who called her by name. By spring, Daisy's world no longer revolved around finding the warm side of machines. It revolved around school mornings, where Raven packed her a lunch and Bear walked her to the corner bus stop when his leg allowed. It revolved around weekends at the clubhouse, where she'd sit on an upturned milk crate coloring while grown men argued good-naturedly about carburetors and exhaust pipes. It revolved around the simple, quiet fact that if she disappeared for more than 5 minutes, someone noticed. Someone called her name. Someone checked if she was okay. The men who had hurt her were behind bars. The lines they'd crossed had been marked. But the real victory was this. A little girl who had once thrown herself in front of a bat now slept with her door half open, unafraid. It would have been easy, later, to tell the story in simple strokes. Bad men, brave child, bikers show up, justice served. People like neat stories, ones that fit on bumper stickers and t-shirts. But life, Bear knew, and Hawk knew, and Raven knew, didn't stay neat for long. Daisy still had scars, some you could see, like the faint line on her shoulder where the bat had brushed past, and some you couldn't, like the way she flinched when someone slammed a door too hard. The lesson wasn't that one big, heroic moment fixed everything. The lesson was that one big, heroic moment opened a door, and what came after was 1,000 small choices to keep walking through it. On the first anniversary of that Christmas Eve, the gas station looked different. Somebody had finally fixed the flickering neon sign. The clerk had a new counter, sturdier than the old one. But the biggest change sat outside. The owner had agreed, hesitantly at first, then proudly, to let the Hells Angels put up a small plaque near the vending machines. It was simple. A metal plate bolted into the wall, with an engraving of a tiny girl and a big bearded biker in the snow. Below it, the words, "In honor of Daisy, who reminded us that courage can be small, cold, and 7 years old, and still change everything." Daisy stood in front of it now, wearing a vest that fit her a little better. The Angel's family patch, scuffed at the edges from a year's worth of living. She traced the engraved letters with her finger, lips moving as she read. Around her, the familiar rumble of motorcycles idled. A smaller group this time, no need for 500 engines to make the point again, but enough leather and ink to turn a snowy parking lot into a circle of safety. Bear stood beside her, beard a little whiter, legs still a little stiff, but eyes brighter. "You know," he said, "you're the only person I know who got a plaque for calling me Santa." Daisy laughed, a sound that came easier these days. "I was wrong," she said. "You're not Santa." Bear put a hand dramatically over his heart. "That hurts," he said. She shook her head, more serious now. "You're better," she added. "Santa only comes once a year. You came back the next morning." He let that sit in his chest like a warm coal. So many people had walked away from this child. The fact that she measured goodness by who stayed, not who shined the brightest, did something to him. "I had help," he said, nodding toward the bikes. "Nobody does this alone, Daisy. Not you, not me." Hawk joined them, hands in his vest pockets, snow clinging to his boots. "Town's different now," he observed, looking out at the highway. "Folks think twice before they decide who's worth protecting and who's not." He tapped the plaque with a knuckle. "You did that, kid." Daisy shrugged, suddenly shy. "I was just scared," she said. Hawk nodded. "That's the only way courage ever shows up," he replied. "If you're not scared, it's not bravery. It's just a hobby." She considered that, then slid her hand into his, the gesture as natural now as breathing. Stories of that night traveled farther than the county line. People shared the video and the follow-ups, the convoy, the courtroom, the plaque. Some viewers shook their heads and muttered, "Never thought I'd call bikers heroes." Others smiled and said, "I always figured there was more to them than the patches." For the Hells Angels themselves, nothing had really changed. And everything had. They still rode the same roads, still looked like trouble to strangers. But in the mirror of that one little girl's choice, they saw their own purpose a little more clearly. They weren't there to be feared for fear's sake. They were there to be the wall that fear broke against when it tried to swallow someone who'd already lost too much. One evening, months later, Daisy sat at the clubhouse table, legs swinging off a too-tall chair, homework spread out in front of her. Bear sat across from her, trying to pretend he was reading the paper when he was really watching her sound out words. "How's that essay coming along?" he asked. She frowned at the page. "Teacher said to write about a hero," she said. "Only one. That's not enough." She glanced around the room, at Raven making coffee, at Hawk going over paperwork, at the cluster of bikers arguing about spark plugs and insurance forms. "Maybe," Bear suggested, "you write about what you learned instead of who." Daisy chewed on the end of her pencil. "I learned that heroes can be loud," she said, "like a lot of motorcycles." She scribbled something down. "But sometimes they're small and scared and cold and still go anyway." More scribbling. And sometimes they've got tattoos and beards, and everybody thinks they're bad until they show up when you're hiding behind a machine. She looked up. That's okay, right? Bear's eyes stung unexpectedly. Yeah, he said. That's more than okay. She bent back over her paper. On the top line, in careful letters, she wrote, "Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather." She paused, then added another sentence beneath it, one her life had proven again and again. Family is who shows up. She didn't have to explain it to anyone in that room. They all understood. Family wasn't the people who shared your last name on a form. It was the ones who answered the phone at midnight, who rode through snow for you, who sat up with you when the nightmares came back and taught you slowly that they didn't get to stay forever. It was the ones who looked like trouble to the rest of the world, but felt like safety to you. Maybe, somewhere out there, another kid was huddled behind a vending machine right now, hugging a toy that was falling apart, listening to grown men laugh in ways that made their skin crawl. Maybe, somewhere, another town was telling itself that certain lives were just background noise. But in this town, on this stretch of highway, there was a plaque on a wall, and a little girl in a leather vest, and a group of bikers who had been reminded, in the clearest way possible, what their presence was for. Engines would keep rumbling. Snow would fall again. Trouble would find new ways to show up. And when it did, this family, stitched together by patches and promises, would be ready. If Daisy's story moved something in you, if you felt that knot in your chest when she stepped out of the shadows and chose to stand between a bat and a man she thought was Santa, then you already know why we tell stories like this. We tell them to remember that courage can come in tiny, trembling packages. We tell them to remind ourselves that sometimes the scariest-looking people are the safest ones to call when the world goes wrong. And we tell them because somewhere, the next Daisy might be watching, wondering if anyone like this exists near her. So if you're still here, listening, we'd love to have you ride a little further with us. Subscribe to Gentle Bikers so you don't miss the next story of leather-clad hearts doing their quiet work in the dark. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Small town, big city, somewhere in between. Because whether you're on a bike or just leaning on your own kind of vending machine tonight, remember what Daisy wrote on her paper. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather. And family? Family is who shows up.